What is the greatest Superman story ever told? Everyone seems to have their own idea. One that I see constantly on lists is Alan Moore, George Perez, and Kurt Swan's Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow. This is one of the most important stories in Superman's history because it closed out an era. This was the last story of the pre-Crisis Superman. Crisis of Infinite Earth's job was to reboot the entire DC universe, merging all of DC's then 52 realities into one. Our story begins when a writer named Tim Crane visits a retired Lois Lane, now Lois Elliott, for an interview. He wants to find out about the last days of Superman. At the start of her story, it was just a normal day in Metropolis.
Then, everything changed when the Fire Nation attacked.
Whoa. I'm sorry, wrong story. Actually, we learned that a couple of Superman's villains had killed each other off in a battle earlier. However, everything truly went downhill in a hurry with the return of Bizarro. In the past, Bizarro, or heck, most of Superman's villains, came off as silly, comedic, or campy. That all changes here. Bizarro shows a brutality he's never displayed before. Before confronting Superman, he destroyed his own backwards world and then comes to Earth and bulldozes several of Metropolis's skyscrapers, mistaking the people's dying pleas for mercy for cheers of joy. He wanted to show Superman that he was the perfect imperfect Superman. In order to stop Bizarro, Superman has to consider doing the unthinkable. This confrontation is just the beginning of the tragedies Clark Kent had to experience in this story. This story also sees the return of two of his most persistent and deadliest villains, as well as a few who in the past were seen as campy, but now suddenly have a very lethal and mean-spirited bent to them. No one knows why this is happening. What starts as seemingly random acts later becomes a murder mystery, but only with the victim still alive. It's just that everyone around the victim is dropping like flies. Just when you think you know who the main villain is, you then find out it's the very last character you would ever expect. The first time I read this story, I had a few issues. 1. Why don't we get more time with the villains? Villains would pop up, do something evil, and then the fight would get resolved quickly in a page or two. While Superman was fighting the villains, we never got into what their motivations were or why they were doing what they were doing. 2. A lot of the supporting characters aren't really as fleshed out enough to get new readers invested. If you were to give this issue to a person who didn't know much about Superman, I don't think it would make as much as an impact on them as someone who had read Superman for years. 3. This story isn't new reader friendly. If you don't know anything about the characters, then this story won't help you out on that regard. But I don't think that was the purpose of this story. I believe that this story was made as a way to reward the longtime readers of Superman. If you are a casual fan of Superman, then this isn't the first story you should read. You'll just get lost. 4. There are a ton of characters in this story, but the issue is only 44 pages long, so don't expect a lot of time focused on their character. This is Superman's story and how the events around him affected him. Now, after reading this again after several years, let's look at the pros and cons. Pro, the writing. While certain parts seemed abrupt, the story does seem really thought out and moves at a good pace. While I don't believe you get a lot of characterization from the supporting players, Alan Moore does give you a sense of who they are. As I stated earlier, what Alan Moore did here was create a murder mystery. He was more successful here with only 48 pages than Cary Bates was with the trial of the Flash, 28 issues, because he was able to expose the emotional core of Clark Kent Superman. You felt bad for each tragedy he had to face and were always there pulling for him. Not so with the Flash. I will also give Moore credit for being as successful in his execution, considering he only had the equivalent of 2 issues to finish off Superman's story in a satisfying way, and succeeded. Con, the writing. Yes, this is a murder mystery, but I feel Alan Moore dropped the ball when it came to the reveal of the true villain. His reveal seemed to come out of nowhere. A good mystery should have clues for the reader to examine and then put the pieces together. I can only assume the point was to have the reader be in the same mindset as Superman, but the final reveal did seem a bit of a cheat. That said, I did like and understand the motivation of the villain. And now time for nitpicking. When does this story take place? Supergirl died in Crisis, and in this issue, Supergirl is dead, but She makes an appearance via time travel with the Legion of Superheroes. She died near the end of Crisis, so how is this story happening? If it's happening during Crisis, why isn't Superman fighting against the Anti-Monitor? The mind reels, but I label this as a nitpick because 1. The emotion of the scene got to me, and 2. It's been a while since I read Crisis and it might be answered there, or maybe it's also answered in the who's who of DC Universe. Next, Pro. The art, the moments, and the resolution. After decades of pussyfooting around, we finally get to see Clark's realization of the whole Clark-Lois love triangle. It finally gets resolved. Also, we get to see the last stand of Superman and his friends versus his villains. The scenes between Clark's friends discussing about what he means to them was powerful. The art for this issue was great, but then again, it was George Perez and Kurt Swan, so what do you expect? I also felt it was classy of DC to bring back Kurt Swan for Superman's final issue, seeing as he made his name as Superman's artist. DC also did the same thing with Carmine Infantino with The Flash. The only difference is Carmine drew the last 50 plus issues of that series. Yes, I do recommend this. I'm surprised it took me as long as it did to finally read this story. I've been an active comics reader since 1989, but it took me 20 years before I actually read this story. I've always known about it, but for one reason or another, I just never got around to reading it. Too expensive, out of print, so on and so forth. I just feel that this was a great way to send Superman off. It had everything a great Superman story has. Thrilling action, drama, perseverance of spirit, and hope. Also, if you want to know what really happened to Superman, just look at the last 3 pages. That's all I'm saying. Well, if you like this video, then please comment below, click like, subscribe, and share this video with other people. And until my next video, goodbye.